My name is Daniel Dickson. I'm a PhD candidate in political science at Concordia University. I'm from Toronto, Ontario. My research is on social policy in the areas of aging and disability. And prior to my graduate studies, I spent 5 years working as a support worker for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The myth that I look at in my chapter is the idea that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are incapable of appropriate social functioning, and so that they age as eternal children. This idea that they're frozen in a state of childhood and that they can't escape this state of childhood at any point in their life. The myth is quite obviously false. It's informed by stereotypical attitudes about disability as this sort of tragedy that happens to people. And so those ideas have been reinforced by a history of exclusion in Quebec and in Canada more broadly. That legacy of exclusion dates back to before Canada became a country. It's most notably through the era of institutionalization, where people with intellectual and developmental disabilities were taken forcibly as children from their families and put into large residential institutions where they were kept secluded from society, sheltered away, and subjected to really abhorrent conditions. So physical, sexual abuse, over-medication, forced sterilization, really unsanitary conditions. And this persisted for a really long time. That era only recently came to an end. There's still a few institutions active in Canada, but mostly the model has shifted towards community living. So people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are increasingly part of communities now. And as a result of not being subject to these terrible conditions, they're living more and more into older adulthood. And so on the one hand, you have this increased visibility, and then on the other, you have a population whose life expectancy is increasing. But despite these changes, this myth is persisting. And so there's still this idea that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are children, no matter what age they are. And so that myth has been reinforced by cultural representations. You see it in fiction. In the chapter, I talk about Forrest Gump and Rain Man, these really popular films that were critically acclaimed, but presented these really reductive representations of intellectual disability. And it seems like it's really difficult for a social imagination to escape this trope of the central struggle in the lives of people with intellectual disabilities is overcoming their dependence on others. And part of the reason for that is we really valorize independence as a culture. If you look at the way disability services are provided, the paradigm for service provision is rehabilitation, right? So the idea is that people with disabilities, by receiving services, can be rehabilitated of their disability. Well, for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are born into that state of being, there's no such thing as rehabilitation. There's no such thing as fully overcoming your disability. And the idea of total independence isn't really an outcome that group necessarily aspire towards. And so part of the problem is, and part of the reason that this myth is so pervasive, is that it subjects a group who are neurodiverse, who have different expectations in life to the same normative expectations that we would impose on people who are not neurodiverse, who are neurotypical. And that is problematic for a number of reasons.